My name is Jennifer Hodges, and I work for Grady Frazier. My counterpart here is Erik Arbut, and he is also an employee at Grady Frazier. Just to kind of give you guys a high level, I guess a couple things. We appreciate the opportunity and the invite to speak this morning. And it's, as you guys have heard our name before, we've had the opportunity and pleasure to work with New Neighborhood, Quercus Alba, at the inception. My predecessor, Harry Lucius, was involved initially in that process. I became involved in about 2010 to work on phase 4 of the project, and Erik Arbut's been involved as well for the install and ongoing operations for the system. So we're very well versed with it, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And again, appreciate the opportunity to speak about this this morning. So I guess just as far as who Grady Frazier is, for many of you that are familiar or not, we are located downtown on Front Street in Traverse City. We were established in 1948, so we're getting ready to celebrate our 75th, which is very exciting. We are a full-service engineering and surveying company, so we offer services, everything, municipal clients, development clients, transportation, on-site wastewater. We full-service surveying, operations and maintenance, pertinent to small community sewer and water systems, and testing construction oversight. There's about 35 employees that comprise of licensed engineers, licensed surveyors, technical staff. Myself personally, I started at Grady Frazier in 2004, so I've been there for 17 years. I am the Director of Engineering and Senior Project Manager. And so my primary role is I work with a lot of municipal clients, development clients, and in a lot of capacities, it's there more as a resource. We start out with a lot of our clients, helping them conceptually through processes, looking at what their problems are, how we can offer some cost-effective solutions, and a practical approach. A lot of it is, our goal is to create a partnership with our clients, with planners, with regulatory agencies to help, whether it's, again, your development, municipal water sewer infrastructure, on-site operations. So a lot of, specifically for me, a lot of the clients that I service in the northern Michigan area would be, as engineer record, would be the city of Manton, Village of Bel Air, Village of Central Lake, Ellsworth, Garfield Township that surrounds Traverse City, the Board of Public Works for Grand Traverse County, Peninsula Township, and kind of the list goes on. We've had the pleasure to operate in that capacity for a lot of these clients for over 30 years. And I hope it's, a lot of it, what we do, it's our relationship building. And just again, being a resource for our clients. So especially today, it's pretty awesome for us to have the opportunity to speak about sewer. A lot of times my kids laugh at me because they never invite me to parent-teacher day because it's kind of boring, you know, because it's like, Mom, toilet flushes, nobody cares where it goes. But no, you guys are all here because you definitely understand and appreciate that. And a lot of times we find with projects when their first inception is they pick a great piece of property and a year later, oh, we don't have access to water and sewer and it doesn't work. And a project could end up dead in that regard, specifically, and they're looking for a new parcel. So it's very important to be involved on the preliminary phases for stuff like that. And just in general, to be good stewards to the community and the environment. We're huge advocates for community, whether it's water or septic systems. So with that being said, I'm actually going to allow Erik to introduce himself. He's going to go through the nuts and bolts of most of the stuff because that's really what he does on a day-to-day basis for community septic, whether it's design and operations. So go ahead, Erik.
Thank you. My name is Erik Arbut. Been with Grady Frazier since 2003. Worked with Quercus Alba. Robert did a great job of explaining the benefits of properly designed and maintained septic systems, so I appreciate that. That was great. I had the opportunity to work on phase 4, a little bit of a redesign, and we currently operate and maintain phase 3 and phase 4 of the new neighborhood. Let's start off with some septic system basics here. Just for an individual on-site system and also for community septic systems, it starts with a septic tank. That's where the primary treatment occurs. You get the solid separations, you get the oils and fats and greases, toilet papers that float to the top. And then you have the settable solids that drop to the bottom of the septic tank, which creates a clear zone in the middle in between, and that's what we call the effluent that continues onto your drain field or to your collection system that would go to a community drain field. Then we utilize a drain field system for the secondary treatment. It happens through the interface of the soil. You have physical and biological treatment that occurs. And so that processes that effluent in the wastewater, treats it, and then it filters down and it recharges your groundwater system. A little bit of septic system do's and don'ts. I have to, whenever I can have the opportunity to speak, I'd like to reiterate that they are sensitive systems, just like Robert said. You can have failures, and it's very important. It's not similar to a municipal system. A lot of people that come from larger cities that are on municipal systems, they have it the flush it, forget it kind of mentality, where you can send anything down there and it just goes away and you don't have to worry about it. Couple of major points here would be to watch your water usage. Nowadays, a lot of the fixtures and appliances do utilize quite a bit less water, which is a good thing. Just got to keep on your teenagers and whatnot. Don't take 1 hour showers and whatnot. Limit the use of harsh chemicals and any excess pharmaceuticals. Dispose of them properly. Don't just flush them down the drain. It's not very good for the bacteria in your septic tanks. That would allow it to do its proper job and to treat the wastewater. Also, a big thing is to minimize any type of stormwater influence on your septic system. So that would include any kind of roof drain connections to your septic tank. You want to site your drain field in your septic tank area such that you don't get water ponding on top of it that would create a chance for premature failures. Also, another big thing would be the water treatment softeners. Anytime they go through a regeneration cycle, that brine is flushed and it goes through into your septic tank, and it's a big disruption on the process in the septic tank, and it can cause the solids in the septic tank to pass along down to your drain field and create a premature failure. Failed to put it up here, and it's a really big thing nowadays, is the flushable wipes. It's become a huge problem for municipalities and on-site systems. You talk to the pumpers around, and it plugs up your pumps, it plugs up filters, it causes you to prematurely pump out your tanks with solids accumulation. So it's a big point to hammer home, is to just take it easy on the wipes and dispose of them properly. Did you have a question, sir?
Yes, how about when you winterize a place up here and they put the antifreeze or whatever they put in there, how does that affect the systems?
Well, so a very small amount of antifreeze would be okay. We recommend that you use more natural type antifreeze, or ones that are safe for RV use. And you just use a very small amount, maybe to fill your traps. Any chance that you can to flush out those lines to get the water out of it prior to going into your septic would be the best. But if you did want to fill your traps with a little bit of antifreeze, that would be acceptable. We've seen that. We have that in some of our communities where they go through and winterize homes, and it's a very small amount. And actually, one of the communities that we work with up in Northport Point there, they have their own service company, and so they have employees that do startup and shutdowns of the home, and they actually suck the antifreeze out so it doesn't get flushed down into the drain. So there's little things that you can do to minimize that type of impact on that. You bet. So residential drain fields are pretty much similar to what the community drain field setup would be. It's just that on a community drain field, obviously the scale is much larger. It's still, you're utilizing that septic tank system and then a drain field after that. A community system, of course, you can do residential and commercial type uses with that. Nice thing is that it will freeze up some area on your property. It takes that drain field area, which can take a decent amount of square footage, and it moves it to another property down the road. There's many options for collection systems for the community systems. There's two different types and then options within those types. The first type would be a sewage collection system, which is the raw sewage would flow from the house either by gravity or by low pressure grinder type pump through your collection system to a bank of community tanks at the treatment area and then to a community drain field. The other option is an effluent collection system, and that's similar to what we have at the new neighborhood, where you have a septic tank on each individual lot, and then after the septic tank, that effluent either flows by gravity to your community system and drain field, or it can also be pumped if your drain field site is at an elevated location, or if it's a certain distance away where it's not feasible to get your gravity collection. I'd say one of the benefits of the septic tank effluent type system, like Robert said, is that you can, a lot of times if there is an issue, it stays on that lot. So if somebody is improperly using their system, a lot of times that septic tank will catch the problem, and the problem will stay on that lot. It will not continue on down and affect the community system, which is a great thing. Also with the effluent collection system, you have the opportunity to save some costs with reduced installation costs by using smaller diameter pipes. So you're dealing with that clear effluent versus solids. With that being said, it also lowers the O&M costs on the system because you're dealing with a semi-clarified effluent versus dealing with large solids, and that's where those wipes come into play. Yes?
What was the first one that you said? It deals with the what of the system? To deal with the clear?
Capital costs.
Capital costs,
Installation
not first costs.
fees. Yeah, there's capital costs and then also operations and maintenance costs, and it's all associated with dealing with the clarified effluent versus dealing with the solids, where you have the oils and greases, you have those wipes, and who knows what gets flushed down there. G.I. Joe. Quite a few benefits of going with a community drain field. The capital costs and the O&M costs are much less than if you would go with a full-blown municipal type treatment plant where you have continuous operations and maintenance, sampling, oversight, and then also, like Robert had mentioned, the economies of scale a lot of times with utilizing a community system versus individual on-site septic systems can be of a benefit and be more cost-effective to utilize. Another benefit would, and then of course new neighborhood is a great example of this, is that it allows for more density in a community in a development versus a development that may utilize individual on-site septic systems. In those cases you need room for your tank, you need room for your drain field, and then you also need room for replacement drain field. So that starts to add up quickly and makes your lot sizes much larger and less dense. Another benefit would be that you could utilize community drain field systems in areas where, say, you're near the water or have a high groundwater table, heavy clay type soils that would not allow for development or installation of an individual on-site system. It would allow for clusters or pockets of housing where you could collect that wastewater that would be generated and then pump it off-site to a treatment drain field. Another potential option for this would be what, like Robert was mentioning, in the village here and other villages, there are a lot of old antiquated systems that are failing, small lots, developed lots that may have outbuildings, garages, structures, whatnot, that would not have the amount of room necessary to have a septic system that would be permitted by the health department underneath the current codes. If there are pockets where you see situations like that, then you can collect those together and form a community system to fix that. Some other common uses of a community drain field would be, oh, sure. Sorry, go ahead.
How far away can a house be from a community drain field?
It can be miles. There's pumps that can handle that. You just have to design the system properly. You have high head effluent pumps that can pump through low diameter force mains, and you can go miles. It's just a matter of designing the proper pump.
And it doesn't have to be a straight line.
It doesn't have to be a straight, that's the beauty of low pressure, is that your main concern is keeping it deep enough. So you want to be 6 feet below grade, so you're out of the frost layer. And then also, of course, maybe deeper if you're going underneath road crossings and whatnot. So a lot of times the hardest part of it is procuring the land and getting the easements and finding your route to get the wastewater to your off-site location. But as far as the design portion of a pump that could pump wastewater, you can go miles. It's not a problem at all. Sure.
While we've interrupted you,
You're fine.
I don't know if it got mentioned before, but do the community fields have reserve fields?
Yes, so that's a portion of the design and permitting process, and Barry may speak to it. That's a requirement through local health departments and through Eagle that you have space set aside for a reserve drain field on each spot. So some other uses would be campgrounds. We've done design work for Timber Ridge Campground in Traverse City. That's a setup where they've developed in phases as the need has increased, and so they have individual cluster systems where they have sited their collection systems and drain field systems in different regions of the park as they've been able to expand. Sure.
So this idea of piping the effluent from a community area to your drain field is kind of intriguing. If you had like a municipal part of a village or something that needed to have a community drain field, could you use the easements, the utility easements for putting the lines underground?
I think so. I believe so. That's if they're
Not water utility.
not water. You have to have isolation from the water.
Right.
But if it's a utility easement, and if you can
Are
get
you
the
saying like
proper
Consumers
isolation.
Energy or DTE?
Yeah, I mean, we have these great big utility easements. Wouldn't
Yeah,
drain
the process,
field
right.
use be considered a utility?
Yeah, that's definitely plausible. I mean, you have to go back to the parent property owner, the underlying property owner, and get permission both from them and from the respective utility company, because they have certain protocol of how close you can install a sanitary sewer line to their high-pressure gas line, or, Consumers Energy with a 3-phase power. There are protocol, just like we wouldn't want, if we had an easement and say DTE contacted us, we would want protocol in place that they can't put it like right on top of ours. But it is plausible, yes.
And a lot of times you'll have to get state and local approval for installation within, even if it's just a road right-of-way. If it's not designated utility right-of-way, even a road right-of-way, you have to get permissions from those entities, and a lot of times the adjacent abutting property owners as well. So there's a process that's associated with it, but it is doable. It's feasible.
So we could run down Front Street if we got all the right permissions from everybody.
If we could get the isolations and permissions, yes, in theory. Also, like we've talked about, small villages, we're doing a redesign for Central Lake. They have a community effluent system that's at an age where it's requiring replacement, so we're working to speak to the reserve area. We're utilizing their reserve area to design their second drain field system. Also apartment complexes, condos, assisted living facilities, so a lot of usages that are available for community septic systems.
I think it's important for everyone here to know that, never say never, but effectively, the core village of Empire that was shown on that map, that could not be developed today. It's impossible.
In that pattern.
In that pattern. Smaller lots, and the key issue is, and it's being alluded to here, is this concept of reserve area. Reserve areas are of an equivalent space to your active drain field that must be set aside and not done and used in any way, shape, or form Don't even compress the soil. Don't pave over it, don't put a building on it. Yep. And that takes up a lot of space. And the reason the village is the way it is because there's a law from the mid-1990s in the state of Michigan that says any city or village that was platted prior to such and such a date is exempt from a reserve area. So the village is allowed, and all the residents and all the commercial properties in the village can continue to have a failed drain field and rebuild it. And they effectively rebuild it on the existing usable space on the lots.
If a shared drain field can be miles away, why would it matter?
Because a shared drain field, now the new neighborhood has reserve areas platted throughout it. So if the village or or whatever entity, private developer, wants to do something like the village today, it would have to probably have reserve areas and a community drain field miles away, which is a lot more infrastructure, and it's a group project, as opposed to the capital costs associated with, I own my fee simple lot, and I'm going to take care of everything I want to do on my fee simple lot, including my drain field, except that you can't do it today in a community like the older section of Empire. Wouldn't be allowed. Hope that was okay.
The only caveat is that you could do a municipal system and be able to do that development. But we're talking about community drain fields.
Yeah, and you're forced into the conundrum of a municipal system or a private public system, which is what the new neighborhood system is. But to do it, everybody on their own lot couldn't do it today. The village is exempt from having to have a reserve area when their drain fields fail.
And to your point, at the current moment, ironically, we're working with a similar community, with a similar situation. The village of Ellsworth, which is just outside of Central Lake and Bel Air, is having the same predicament. They have a downtown district with extremely aged infrastructure. They've got the lake right there too, so there's a huge environmental component, and they're not in a plausible position to replace their existing infrastructure, drain field, septic tanks. Plus, there's also a benefit that if those were to go away, they have usable space for parking or other amenities. So we've gone through a feasibility study with them, and obviously a community drain field is an option for them, but it would necessitate multiple parcels for them to accommodate the amount of population that they have. And so they're unfortunately or fortunate, the most cost effective for them is a community wastewater treatment facility, which is comprised at this point of a facultative lagoon system. So, but you know, that's again where engineers are here to be a resource and tool for everyone, depending on your situation, to help work with you, come up with some costs, ideas, concepts, work with the regulatory agencies such as Eagle to find out what's going to work best for your situation, because there's a lot of different variables.
So is there a certain size
There
when you grow beyond that, you have to get a lagoon system then?
correct, and we're going to get into that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're
Sorry,
getting there.
jumping in.
Did you have?
So what's the difference in cost between a community septic system and a traditional lagoon system? Is there quite
A lot.
jump?
Well, it's just not even the capital costs, but there's ongoing long-term operations and maintenance costs associated with Erik's time, because you have to be there daily and monitoring. There's chemical feed. There's a lot of layers to that.
Sampling requirements. Sampling
Sampling requirements are different, and Eagle does a very good job of enforcing it too.
And like Jennifer said, that's where we come in. It's not a cookie cutter approach. Each development, each community is going to be different. So there's different availability of land and the size of each community. So that's, you have to look at each project independently and come up with the best solution for that. Quick overview of permit requirements. Any system that serves multiple property owners on a single system requires what they call a Part 41 construction permit through Eagle. I believe Barry will expand upon that in his presentation. So that's one of the permits that would be required. Then from there, permitting is based upon your flow, your daily flows. For the most part, systems that are less than 6,000 gallons per day are reviewed and permitted through the local health departments with guidance from Eagle. We utilize the Michigan criteria for subsurface sewage disposal guidance document for those designs, and then also with the local codes. Systems that are between 6,000 gallons per day and 10,000 gallons per day are reviewed and permitted by Eagle, and they require a groundwater discharge permit, so it's an additional permitting step that is required for those systems. It also requires annual submittal of a report to Eagle of daily flows of your system, and also submittal of an operations and maintenance manual. Then off from that, systems that are above that 10,000 gallons per day, it's also a groundwater discharge permit, but along with that, there's increased testing requirements, limits for wastewater sampling, like Jennifer was discussing, more intensive maintenance and fees. So a lot of times developers, if possible, would like to stay below that 10,000 gallon limit. And of course, with everything, local ordinances and guidelines must be followed as well. So for the community drain field systems, we tend to keep the flows below that 10,000 gallons per day threshold. That's what keeps the cost down for the operations and maintenance and your capital costs from not having a full-blown treatment system. Flows are established utilizing the Michigan criteria. For instance, they utilize 150 gallons per day per bedroom for the most part. And then for other types of commercial usages, there's guidance in that. There's a table that has different flows for different industries and different usages. So we tend to use that Michigan criteria as our guideline for sizing each treatment system and determining the daily flow. For your septic tanks, you want to have a minimum of 24 hours of retention in the septic tanks. So if your total flow is 6,000 gallons per day, you want to have septic tanks that have at least 6,000 gallons per day of storage to get proper treatment. We base the collection system design on the Michigan criteria and also 10 state standards documents. In all community systems, I like to recommend dosing tanks, like Robert mentioned, get your uniform distribution of your wastewater. However, not all systems are required. Once you get to the 2,000 gallon per day range is when you start getting into those requirements where the entities will require that you do have a dosing tank with pumps so that you can have your low pressure distribution. That allows for those periods of dosing and then resting and cycling through each part of the field and have uniform distribution.
Can I ask what dosing means?
When you take the primary treated, the effluent, the clarified effluent that leaves your septic tank, which in a typical household would then go to your drain field. With those systems that are in that 2,000 and above range, you have a dosing tank, which houses dosing pumps. And so when you dose the drain field, that's when a pump turns on and sends that effluent to a portion of the drain field. Along with the requirements, we have horizontal isolation distances from your tanks, from your collection lines, from your drain field, all those components. You want to make sure you're properly isolated from your surface waters, from your property lines, from boundaries, from neighboring wellheads, whatnot. The bottom of your drain field must be at least 4 feet of isolation from the bottom of that drain field stone to either groundwater table. You can also have a limiting soil layer if you get into your clays, your heavy soils that won't allow the water to percolate through. So you want to get that 4 foot of isolation, whether hopefully through naturally occurring soils in some cases, you can utilize some fill soils to get that 4 foot of separation. Then the drain field size itself is site-specific. You utilize soil evaluations, typically with the local health department, sometimes with an Eagle soil scientist and the engineer, to determine the soil types that will be underneath your drain field area. And based on those soil types, you get specified application rates through the Michigan criteria, which establish minimum drain field sizes. Of course, you can go above and beyond that, but that's where your minimums are established, is through that Michigan criteria. The drain field should be sited in areas of gradual slope. You don't want to install your drain fields on heavily sloped sites, so you want to minimize potential for breakout. And also you want to stay away from areas with large drop-offs, where you can also have blowouts on the drop-off. Like to usually design in certain safety features as well with these systems, especially around the tank areas. You want to make sure at a minimum that you have lids that can be bolted down. You can also design cast iron lids that are too heavy to be lifted by children and other folks, and limit the chance that someone could enter those tanks. You also want to have, if you do have a pump system, a dosing system, you want to make sure that you have a control panel that's either in a building or fenced in area, or at a very minimum a lock that's on a latch on that control panel to make sure that curious kids aren't getting into it, or anybody else. So, and then of course keep the drain field area maintained. That's good for the health of the drain field, makes the area look nice, and just good for overall safety. It's a very important part of the design also is your flow monitoring system. So some of the sites that are below the 6,000 gallon per day threshold that require monitoring of flow, we still recommend that at a very minimum you utilize elapsed time meters and cycle counters on your pumps. So that allows you to get a ballpark idea. As an operator, you know that your pump pumps at a certain rate, and you can utilize those elapsed times for each pump to troubleshoot to see if one pump's running longer than the other, or if maybe one pump is down. That's a big help. But on the systems that are above that 6,000 gallon range, and in between 6 and 10, where flow monitoring and reporting is required, we like to install flow meters. Flow meters can range from as simple as an analog meter with a readout on the dial where an operator goes and takes a reading once a day, once a week, what have you, or you can get as involved where it's automatic tracking, where you just plug into the system and it automatically generates readouts of your daily flows. But flow tracking is extremely important in these situations for reporting, and then also for troubleshooting. Another option is to have telemetry or SCADA installed on your system. That will allow for your operators to dial into the system at any time, take a look at your flows, your pump run times, any type of alarms. So then in the event of an alarm situation, a lot of times these drain field systems can be in a remote area where somebody may not see that red light flashing or that horn going off. So if you can have a SCADA system associated with that, that's a great tool for your operators to minimize your backups and any kind of issues. Sure.
On these field sizes and your design guidelines, something unique in the new neighborhood, thanks to you guys, is you have 4 separate drain fields within about I don't know, Robert, 5-acre area, 10-acre area?
I'm talking about the central.
60 lots, 4 drain fields. They are all under 10,000 gallons a day. And they were permitted 20 years ago, as if they were their own unique drain field. And I know Barry's here, and you guys. I've been told that if this was tried to be replicated today, this would be considered 4 6,000 gallon per day system. It would be considered 24,000 gallons per day, and it would therefore fall over the regulatory cliff that this 10,000 gallon per day. This is a very important point for anybody who wants to do this. 10,000 gallons a day or more, you fall into a regulatory cliff that incurs a lot more costs, and especially a lot more operating and maintenance costs. And you have to actually start to pre-treat the effluent before you go into the drain field or discharge into a river. So could this be done today and still be permitted as 4 6,000 gallon per day systems?
So I'll let Barry speak to that in his,
Chris, I was gonna,
Yeah.
I was gonna kind of talk about that a little bit in my presentation. But I think the main message I wanted to bring here was, you know, that it's really, I think the department wants to look at it on a case-by-case basis, and, you know, we don't have any, you know, established guidelines or rules or laws that, you know, that dictate how we act in that situation. The groundwater permits unit in Lansing, which is not where I work, they, you know, I think it's just dependent on the developer to submit a proposal and then let the groundwater permits unit decide whether, you know, they want to permit it, you know, with all of the individual systems added together, which adds the cost and complexity that you were referring to, or whether, you know, whether they would allow a system like New Neighborhood to be built today. I think it's just, it's very site dependent and it's hard to generalize.
Okay, good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
It's not a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
a new neighborhood may be somewhat unique that you have the availability of a nice community water source. And so that alleviates a lot of the issues with your isolation distances to wells and wellheads. And so if you have a piece of property that's large enough, you're able to space out your drain fields accordingly, get decent separation between your drain fields, and then on top of that, you're still able to protect your groundwater aquifer from nearby drinking water sources, then that helps. But that's what I'd take. I don't want to jump ahead of it, but it sounds like it's not a heck no answer. It's a case by case based on environmental impact. You may need to do additional hydro-geo studies to prove that you're not going to harm that aquifer and drinking water sources down gradient. So to say that another another new neighborhood couldn't happen again, I don't know that that's the case. It's just a case by case, and that's why we try to have a good working relationship with Eagle and go through that process, do the design standards, and propose that type of usage and discharge. So.
Well, and like Ellsworth that I brought up before, we looked at that, but their predicament, they didn't have access to multiple properties. To build this in phases, they had one wooded lot, which would load that into an entire lot. So looking for them, I mean, they were not part of that case-by-case process. But another example, we're working with the Village of Central Lake that Erik had brought up, and their community drain field, and their size is 48,000 gallons per day. And we were fortunate enough working with the Groundwater Discharge Permit Agency, and they allowed us to replace that in kind, which we were concerned that because it was going to be a replacement system and they exceeded that 10,000, that they may have to provide either mechanical treatment or lagoon. And because of their economic situation, proximity of the existing facility and the way it had been historically operated, we were allowed to be precluded from the new standards and do a drain replacement. So yeah, that's where having a consultant that's your advocate and looking for a cost-effective solution is really going to help, and a great relationship with Eagle too.
So we're getting a little short on time. I was going to go through a little
Yes,
bit.
sir.
Oop.
Jay had a question.
Yeah, don't worry about the time, we can just have lunch a little later.
We could just smell it.
So the system we were just talking about, this town didn't have to have an elaborate system because they were older and they fell under the existing place exemption that Chris was talking about before?
Yeah, they had an existing
They're an existing,
community
yeah.
drain field system that was previously
Put in
permitted.
40 years ago.
Yeah, 40 years ago, and it had, the drain fields were in a state of failure. And
So they were exempt from.
correct, from being required to meet the newer standards.
The extra replacement area.
Correct.
So, this new urbanists, we are very intent on making compact walkable places. And I think it's also the policy of the state of Michigan to work with existing villages and towns to reinforce them and allow them to flourish and grow a bit. So it'd be very, instead of when Adam goes to a village or town and comes up with this great plan to make things better and more dense and walkable, it'd be good to know ahead of time what's feasible. And it'd be nice if there was a quick and rough and ready way to sort of estimate, what is the feasibility of doing some things.
Yeah, we'd like that too. No, it's not always cut and dry. I mean, and Eric knows this better than me, but I mean, there's proximity to the lake, we have isolation distances, we have housing density, flow demands, what type of use, groundwater table conditions. There's so many different parameters, and that's why it's essential for large-scale projects to have an engineering consultant involved up front to help with feasibility studies, and those can be done pretty cost-effectively to outline some plausible options and what costs associated with those would be. Yeah, and do that research.
Yeah, I think there's something in Michigan, Jim can tell us about it, maybe that there's a development-ready state condition that communities can get into, so they're ready for redevelopment or improvement. But I think it's over a certain population, which villages would fall under. But maybe it would be great for little places like Thompsonville or Maple City to have that option to be development ready and get some sort of rough and ready evaluation from folks like you who know what's feasible.
And some of those communities are pursuing that, and we work with them, and actually we work with Village of Thompsonville too. The problem that falls for them is they have very limited staff who work part-time. Even their clerk, their treasurer might work, because they have to have a full-time job. I mean, we don't, I sit on my own personal planning commission, and it's just because I'm nosy. It doesn't pay the bills by any means, and we just are invested in our community. So that's the struggle they have, is because it does require, either they have to pay someone or on-site staff, and they just don't have those resources.
It'd be good if a county could have some staff person that would assist in there. Because it would be a benefit to the county to reduce the sprawl and expansion of services, which are costly. Even sheriff's services, it costs more when you have to patrol huge areas.
Well, that's great ideas.
So it would be good if the county had what position?
Some sort of position to help villages,
A county planner.
villages like this.
Yeah.
The county planner would have responsibility to do that.
We have a county planning department.
Yeah, maybe she doesn't, maybe she's not authorized to do that, to work for villages to provide that service.
Well, I think that's because you have a unique perspective and they haven't thought of it yet.
That's correct. We're trying.
I think along those lines too, just real quick, I think the Regional Council of Governments also provides some of those services sometimes, especially through the Redevelopment Ready Communities program through MEDC.
No, and there are resources. I mean, there's NLEA, and there's other organizations that people have access to, but sometimes we just don't know what questions to even ask. We don't know what we don't know. Yeah.
Just a quick idea of what's associated as far as submittals to the agencies to get one of these systems permitted. First step is to do that soil evaluation and provide soil logs and locations on a site plan. to the health department, along with your preliminary design and layout of your development with the locations of course, drinking water and wastewater utilities. Then you go through the review process with the agency, whether it be the local health departments or with Eagle, and then come up with that final design set that's sealed and submitted to the agency, along with specifications for the installation of the system. And then, of course, O&M manual on the back end to make sure that the system is operated and maintained properly. I'll let Barry handle most of this, but the main thing is just that breakdown of the different flow levels when you're underneath that 6,000 gallons per day versus when you're in between the 6 to 10, where the permitting process gets a little bit more complicated and elongated, and then also the continued monitoring and reporting that's required on top of that. And then, of course, once you jump above that 10,000 gallons per day is when you really start getting into the extensive monitoring, reporting, and infrastructure. Sure.
Also, to put add additional perspective to this, because I live in the new neighborhood. You're hearing this term O&M, operating, annual operation and maintenance. The annual O&M for a system in the new neighborhood is $500 or less. Divide that by 15 homes, 20 homes. Now, that's not the homeowner also, if the homeowner cares to have an inspection done on their tank. The O&M, the annual inspection, Erik does it for 2 systems. His firm charges less. So that's the big 2,000 gallon tanks. That's $500 a year, annual maintenance and inspection. Now, if a pump has failed, Robert said earlier, it's an $800 pump, probably $1,200 today. If you got a reserve, for the drain field, you want a reserve for maybe 30 years hence, having to replace the drain field, that's additional cost. But the actual cost of running the system annually is less than $500 a day. When we did a municipal study, when you go over 10,000 gallons a day and you have to have equipment and a lot more regulatory requirements, it gets into the tens of thousands of dollars a year without any of this reserving I'm talking about. It gets into tens of thousands of dollars a year. That's why I call the 10,000 gallons a day a regulatory cliff. Not the fault of the regulators, it just is, it is what it is. So these are incredible. And then the other thing that's important to say is reserving for a replacement drain field, the way this thing was designed, and when you put in these additional tanks, Erik doesn't remember, but 4 years ago, I watched him stick the stick in the 3 2,000 gallon tanks of my neighbor's system. All right? Now, anybody's individual septic tank might have, well, I pumped mine for the first time after 7 years. We had 4 inches of sludge in the bottom, according to Williams Bay. You go to the tanks that everybody's individual tanks flow to. The first tank, I remember, Erik, I get excited about this stuff. You know, the first tank had after 20 years of operating, the first combined tank had about 1 inch of sludge. The second 2,000 gallon tank was about 1/2 inch of sludge. And then I asked Erik, so how much he's got his assistant, and they're putting the big stick down in there. I said, so how much is in the dosing tank? The third 2,000 gallon tank, right? None. So that means what you're putting into your drain field, I call it clarified black water. It's got so much of the solids and sediments that are kind of in the water have settled out that you're putting in the best black water you possibly could in an untreated into a drain field. And that means that, and because it's a pressure system, And as Robert said earlier, it's reaching all the way to the end of the drain field, not the first 10 feet of a line. Our drain fields in the new neighborhood, I predict, as long as everybody's good about it and not putting wipes and everything else down, our drain fields will last an incredible length of time. I'm going to say 30, 50, 40, 50 years. Because the water has so much solids already taken out of it, and it's getting, the whole land area of the drain fields is getting utilized. It is absolute genius what exists in that neighborhood.
Right, and that's another benefit of the operations and maintenance. If you do see that, that's why we track it. And so if we see those sludge layers building up in those tanks prior, you can pump it out before it gets to that final dosing tank and eliminate that potential for problems. So, yeah, that's a great point. It's just good benefit of consistent operations and maintenance and monitoring. So for developer community, the costs to consider, I'm not going to throw out any numbers right here just because the cost varies so greatly depending on the size of the system and the complexity of the system essentially. So some of the costs, you're looking at the design costs, you're looking at the permitting costs, fees to agencies, costs for engineers to submit the applications and supporting documents. If you're a good developer like Robert was, you pay for some construction oversight and management while it's being installed. Of course, you have the construction capital costs itself. The engineer can provide cost estimates at the time of design. Once we start to get a good idea of what your system is going to look like, we'll have a much better idea of what your capital costs are going to be. Then, of course, once the system is installed, you're going to have your ongoing costs, your operations and maintenance. You want to perform those site visits. You have the reporting to the agencies if required. Of course, you have your utilities, your electric, your service, your phone or cellular line. If it's associated with a panel, you'll have to consider that. And then, of course, it's good practice, and it's also required through the Part 41 process that you do have a repair and replacement fund or escrow that's established at the inception of the project and then built upon thereafter to account for your operations and maintenance fees, and then of course your reserve and replacement, repair and replacement costs. Touch on operations a little bit. You have your operating or your reporting requirements. It's highly recommended for all systems. It's really only required for those systems that are 6,000 to 10,000 gallons per day by law, that you have those annual site visits, you do your septic tank inspections, and then you have that ongoing flow monitoring requirement where you track your daily flows and report that to Eagle on an annual basis. So when your inspections, you're checking your tanks, you're looking at your drain field. You want to monitor if there's any ponding in that drain field area. You want to look for green lush areas in certain portions of your drain field that would tell you that there's portions of the field that may be plugging off, or that you're not getting that nice uniform distribution through your pump system. And then part of the 6,000 to 10,000 gallon per day permit as well is doing a weekly check of that drain field area. You're checking for, make sure there's no wastewater at the surface, unusual odors in the area, and that's just a protection of public health. And as far as your maintenance, it's basically, you do those standard operations and maintenance visits. Based on those visits and what you see, it'll pop up any issues that you want to take care of. And then, of course, you want to utilize your manufacturer's recommendations on maintenance on frequency of your maintenance and for each component. And then through that escrow and balance account, that's where you try to avoid any type of situations that can get you in a bind, where you planning ahead and have that money available so that you can draw from those funds, and you're not putting yourself in a pinch with having to go in the negative for your account balance. switch back over to Jennifer here to talk about some opportunities for funding.
The fun stuff, how are we gonna pay for this? And just so everybody's aware, we will have this PowerPoint made available. I believe I provided a copy to Jay, so anybody that would like to have this afterwards, we're happy to share it via email too, or you can get with Jay. But some possible funding sources, and it really depends on who you are. But what typically I work with a lot of times is through the federal government, it's the USDA, Rural Development. And that's a grant loan process. Although don't tell them I said grant, because they'll be mad. It's supposed to be a loan, but the grant portion is purely income level basis, where you're at for a village or a township or a 501, some of those entities, it's purely based on median household income. So that's kind of the component. We're a big advocate for that route just because it is over a 40-year term. And at the moment, interest rates are the lowest we've seen, and I've seen in almost 20 years I've been doing this. So it's pretty remarkable to go that route. And this, mind you, these are funding options to cover the upfront capital costs, the engineering fees, the design fees, and the actual infrastructure itself. The state of Michigan has a couple. One relative to sanitary sewer is their state revolving fund. And they do offer what's called a loan forgiveness depending on your median household income. The terms of that loan is 30-year and currently about 2.5%. With them, it's a shorter period. It's also subject to wage compliance, which is Davis-Bacon. So there are some other layers with that. MEDC, the CDBG grants are another plausible funding. There's at times where they're offering different opportunities specifically targeted towards mixed-use housing developments. So if you're a developer in that regard or working for one, this may be through HUD and different entities. This might be a very good plausible option too. And they continue to have ongoing information and different grant opportunities, loan opportunities through them. And so a good resource is just to get onto their website and take a look at that. And then the conventional low interest loan or bonding, where you're just basically going to your bank. And typically what we see in that regard, that's when you go through and ultimately, if you're a housing development, you may, through your loan, ultimately establish what's called a special assessment district. And then through that process, that's when you appropriate those costs accordingly and generate and apply those to either the lot fees or we'll call it a connection fee, which is on the next slide. And the other thing we're continuing to keep track of, as everybody's been paying attention to, is the ARPA money. The state and feds have been going through releasing ARPA money. They've also got substantial infrastructure bills that we're hopeful some will get appropriated in northern Michigan and not just downstate. So some of that's still, we're still waiting for final decisions. I know the initial ARPA money that's been made available to villages and townships and counties is looked for targeting towards infrastructure, water and sewer, broadband, hazard pay, things like that. So that's definitely exciting that the state and the feds are recognizing the age of our infrastructure and the need to, whether even it's private on-site drain fields, the need that they need attention and we need to do something. So those are a couple things just to bring, but then as I talked about connection fees, a lot of times the connection fees are, like I said, they'll be applied to the lot or during when they're purchasing it, or what we truly call a connection fee. So it's intended to help reimburse back for the upfront capital costs that the developer invested. And then moving forward, just like New Neighborhood 2, and any of us that pay our cell phone bill or electric bill, we have monthly fees, and those are intended to address what Eric had talked about, the operations maintenance fees, and for replacement. And then finally, a couple other things, just how we can help you. Again, as through our introduction, and I hope it resonated, that it's our goal to be a resource first and foremost, and to help anyone that's going through this process. We encourage you to contact us, and because our hope is to be a one-stop shop. I mean, we will help all the way through design processes, whether it's conceptual, permitting, even looking at financial grant opportunities, creating a set of construction documents to help you even go through the bidding process if you want to solicit for a contractor, if you don't have one, to ensure that you're getting someone qualified that meets all the criteria, helping with construction oversight. And again, that's really just to ensure that everything got built to the standards that they're supposed to be built to, because it can happen that, because it's not required, but we definitely want to enforce and advocate that everything that we've drawn up, designed, everything meets our requirements along with regulatory. And we'll provide full testing, construction oversight, and management to assist with the project, and then after the fact and everything's in use and long-term operations of the facility. And
Survey on the front end too.
and thank you. Yes, on the front end. And then just to kind of give you a synopsis of a few projects that we've implemented community drain fields with. Village of Central Lake, we talked about a minute. Timber Ridge Campgrounds is one that, what are they up to, about 320 campsites? And that's been a phased approach with multitude of clustered septic. Walker Shores is a housing development. New neighborhood, of course. Ironton Cove was a mixed use, and that was one that captured and collected all their sanitary sewer, and we had a community drain field that was a couple miles away, so they were able to acquire a parcel and optimize the density of their existing parcel, acquire a separate one to send their sanitary sewer. Town Line Apartment Complex was a 30-unit apartment complex up in Pellston that had a community drain field. And then there's a lot of other options that are available, but we do, I guess with that closing, I did bring some contact information to the table on the right-hand side with some literature, Eric and my business cards. We're gonna be here for a bit, but if anybody does have any questions, please use us as a resource. We're happy to help, and, Yes, sir.
Are these systems a mixture of privately owned and municipally owned, or
Yeah,
what?
like Central Lake is a municipal community.
Okay.
But the other ones here listed are private.
So when the Town Line Apartment Complex in Pellston had to replace their system, their community drain field,
They haven't replaced it. That was a new system.
or put one in,
Yeah,
how did they pay for that up front?
that was all MISHDA. So that was through their, a MISHDA grant that they
They got a
received for
MISHDA.
low-income housing. Yep.
Because I think it's important to also everybody reflect on necessarily. In the case of the new neighborhood, this was a private development. So the infrastructure of putting in this system fell on the backs of this guy.
Correct.
He had to have that money, or had to sign, or he went to the bank
And got a bond,
and took a lot of debt. And banks don't like to lend to private developers for this stuff. It is a lot easier for a private developer to go in and have just the right size lots, to have a reserve field. Remember, you got to have a reserve field. Have the right size lots, put in a street, put in underground electric power, put in maybe underground gas and a cable line. But don't mess with wastewater. That falls then on the homeowner when they want to build a house. They got to get a whole septic system. That falls on the homeowner. You make this fall on the up on the front end to a developer, or a relationship with a bank if you've got one, and you have a bank that even wants to lend against this stuff on a private basis. That's a huge risk and a huge outpouring of money. It ain't easy. Now, there's an interesting project going on in Leelanau County right now. It's been 3 years, but there are 20 homes on the southwest corner of North Lake Leelanau. It's a different engineering firm, sorry guys. But these homes are all on holding tanks. And they got some land a half mile away. They're going to pump their effluent and got some land. And it's a lot of money. It's $1 million project, give or take. It's a lot of money to upfront that. And these are second homes, lakefront properties, okay? Leland Township is actually going to use municipal lending power of a township and take a loan out, put a special assessment against those 20 properties, last I heard, trying to follow the project. And when the 20 properties, and it was going to be a 10-year debt at very low interest rates, with the power of the municipality and the better risk that the banking community will look upon on that. They're going to special assess after 10 years when the debt's paid off. The 20 homes they're going to deed over the system to the 20 homes will then own it privately. But that was a unique private-public partnership up front, because it's very hard to get just straight out commercial lending for this stuff in today's world. So
And that happens more frequent when you get to the larger counties like Grand Traverse County. That's quite a common practice.
Right.
There's quite a few areas. Miami Beach Road was one that we had worked on out in Acme. Similar situation, private development and bonded with the county, and then a special assessment district.
So the municipality
Correct.
lends its
Yeah.
lending ability.
Yeah.
That's really creative.
No, it is, and that's, the hope too is that's part of the process we'll help educate and work with too. So, thank you, sir.
Good.